Welcome to leg 3 of the race to replace. Every week we'll recap the news and spill the tea on what's going on in the Liberal leadership race. The prize for the winner, you get to lead a party that is surging in the polls, or 22%, depending on your pollster of choice. Thanks to everybody who's been listening, who's been leaving reviews, who's been subscribing. I saw a review on YouTube last week, someone complaining that we don't have enough conservative perspective on the panel. That's not really the point of the show, but I will try to do a round of introductions, channeling my inner Pierre Poilievre, just to make our conservative listeners feel a bit more at home. So joining us this week, we have Carbon Tax Tyler, the architect of the socialist and Marxist policies of the Trudeau government. He is joined by Carbon Tax Vandana, who forced the woke leftist Trudeau agenda on Canadians when she was in the PMO, and of course, Carbon Tax Dan, who is just like Justin. Tyler, Vandana, how you guys doing?
I think I like being known as Queen Woke from now on. I think it's a nice hashtag for me. I just got a flight from Toronto, and let me tell you, everyone in my office, and these are people who are not liberals, but they are engaged in politics right now. They are asking about federal stuff, provincial stuff, like lots of going on. So lots of chatter.
For those who are listening to the audio podcast, I am wearing my lucky red tie because today is day one. We're recording this obviously on Wednesday night. It is day one of the Ontario provincial election. And I would just say Godspeed to Bonnie Crombie and the Ontario Liberals. It's an interesting time to be doing this also in the midst of a federal Liberal leadership race. It's actually feeling like renewal in Liberal Canada, guys.
I like it. I like renewal. I like energy. People like to get engaged. It's good.
That's good. And speaking of energy, we have got a field of 6 candidates who have all been approved. We're going to talk about tonight. Krista Freeland, Mark Carney, Karina Gould, Frank Baylis, Jaime Batiste, and Ruby Dalla have all been approved as Liberal candidates in the race. So that means this week is the Ruby Thursday Spectacular, a 3-hour deep dive on the path to victory for Ruby Dalla. It's going to be very exciting. If we get through that, we might talk about some of the other candidates as well. This week, Vandana has done a little research on who's running the campaigns. We'll talk a bit about that. We've got the Mulcair Minute coming back, where we're going to get all GBA plus on what's going on in the race. And then we'll talk about a few other things as well, too. So, as mentioned, the field is set with those 6 candidates.
Minus Chandra.
Sadly, Chandra Area not approved as a candidate, but his campaign will live on in our hearts as long as we remember it and hold it dear to us.
And he gets his $50,000 back.
Well, there you go.
There's a
prize.
Upsides.
We also have passed the deadline for people to sign up to vote in the race. The party hasn't released a list number yet. Tyler, do you have any sense of when the list is coming, how big it's going to be? What's our best guess there?
So I don't know for sure, but I had heard that it would take about 5 or 6 days to process and figure out. Now, I think for listeners who may not have clued in during the Ontario Liberal leadership race, all 3 of us were involved in different ways in that race that happened over a year and a half ago. And I think what we all experienced there was a bit of duplication, let's just say, in the data. It wasn't always the greatest. And given we haven't done this for over 10 years, right, guys? Like, I suspect it's going to take the party a little bit of time to collate those lists. But I think what I certainly have been hearing from a lot of MPs. Now, remember, these are MPs, not in the unheld ridings. We talked before about the fact that the unheld ridings are where all the points are. But at least in terms of the MPs, what I'm hearing is that there has been huge signups, right? I'm hearing 1,000 members in this riding, triple or quadruple in another riding, 800, 1,200 over there. Like, there's a possibility, assuming that we had somewhere maybe around 85,000 to start with, there's a possibility we could crack 200,000 and maybe 250,000. We'll see.
Yeah, I went to the couple of leadership events that were going on in Ottawa last week. And by the way, a lot of people listening to the podcast, a few people said, I'm really enjoying listening to Vandana on the podcast. I don't know if we should take this as a slight, Tyler, but that was the most common piece of feedback I got from people I talked to. But I did also get to talk
GDP per capita.
Yeah, I don't know. But I did also talk to about a dozen MPs there. Yeah, like they were just like giddy. I've not seen the Liberal caucus in this mood in so long. It was like everyone's signing up and I'm getting such good feedback on the ground. And
that's great.
Look, we'll see if it's real or not. At the very least, I think it's a jolt of energy. It'll be good for fundraising. It'll be good for volunteers. And yeah, I think my best guess is probably we will be over 200,000 for memberships. But I mean, I guess we'll find out once the party cleans the lists and goes from there.
I found like party list cleanup is like every campaign, even the last federal leadership, there were list issues, provincials, there's list issues. Like it's just like some people I've noticed will say yes to a lot of people. Like as we're all, we have connections to every campaign, lots of other organizers do. So names go around and you have to convince those. But I find that really, I find that's a problem throughout every campaign like that.
Okay.
And there's also been this speculation, right? I think we've all seen it online of, is there any organized effort that's going on to try to sign up non-liberals to participate in the race? I suspect that actually is not happening, at least at a
Yeah,
systemic level, because it's actually
agreed.
really hard to do. But I think it's interesting. I don't know if folks noticed, Parker Lund, our mutual friend at the party, communications director, did put out a tweet earlier this week saying, as a reminder, under the Canada Elections Act, you
Hmm.
face a potential fine should you fraudulently try to participate in this process. And so I think the
It's
party
a
is going
hefty
to be,
fine too. It's like
yeah,
10K.
that's
Like
right.
you can maybe like it was like a $500, $1,000. Like sure, 10K is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
So I think they're going to take a lot of time to be careful with the list. I suspect by the time we record our podcast next week, we will have a number.
Yeah.
And of course, the interesting thing of all that is that list will be available to all the campaigns, and then we'll enter the persuasion phase of this race.
Do we want to take bets? See who's the closest
What are we
on the
betting?
number?
What are we
I'll
betting?
say I'll say 265,000. What do you want?
I'll do 250.
I'll do 240. I'm just going to come under 250. I think
Okay.
we'll be close, but that does seem like a stretch.
All right, let's see who's closest. This week we've got 3 or 4 different news stories I wanted to run through. Let's start with the endorsements. There's actually been a lot of endorsements,
Yeah.
primarily from Mark Carney, since the last time we recorded. As of this morning, we're up to 56 MP endorsements for Carney, 27 plus Freeland for herself, 2 plus Gould for herself. Vandana, any prominent names, anything that stands out in the past week?
Yeah, for Mark Carney, I would say Minister Marcy Ian, Anita Anand, Francois Philippe Champagne, and Seamus O'Regan are big names. Minister Freeland has Ahmed Hassan, huge organizer, and don't think he's just stuck to Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. Like this man can organize in the prairies. Like if I need something to do in like Saskatoon, like he has people. So I would not underestimate him. He's great at building relationships. But I will say there's some great organizer endorsements there too. Tyler Banham, and for those who, I mean, most people will know who he is in the Banham family and his sister Elise, and they are longtime grassroots volunteers. He's the former Ontario LPCO president. He was a candidate at some point. But if you want something in Hamilton, like you tend to go to Tyler. So, and he knows a lot of people, not just in Hamilton, but I'll say like throughout the Southwest. He's just been around a long time, former correction staffer as well. So that's actually pretty big. That's a big organizer. And I had to mention this other organizer because they're mentioned in RDE, on RadCan. And Andre Lynn was the one who was like, oh my God, this poor man has a real name. And they mentioned Navdi Baines and son patriarche, Papa Baines, which is what everyone calls Papa Baines. The Prime Minister calls him Papa Baines. Everyone calls him Papa Baines. This is Nav's dad. His name is Balwinder, and I want to talk about him because he needs his flowers. This man is the best organizer, the kindest person, and basically like my second dad. And he can, if you have Papa Baines on your side, chances are you got a really good shot of winning. So Balwinder Baines is like a key person to have on your side. But he told
And
me
he
when
endorsed Carney, right?
he endorsed Carney, and he did tell me, he called me, he's like, Vandana, I did today worked 8 hours for Carney, and like that's a lot. That's a lot of time, and he's good at motivating people. So those are two organizer names that are actually pretty good and can also definitely create paths for you and find members and money for you, which is what's going to be needed.
Yeah, endorsements where they actually do work
Yes,
is
that's the
nice.
most
But
important.
that's not all endorsements, I think, fair to
They're
say.
not all equal for sure.
Glad Nate
So
Erskine-Smith. That was a big one,
Hmm.
right?
Oh, Nate, so sorry. Yes, Nate also endorsing Carney, also a big name.
And I have to say, I'll just note on a personal note. I posted something over the weekend when that happened, saying this is obviously big because Nate has a real following. He built a big following in the party, especially during the Liberal leadership provincially when he ran. But I said it was puzzling, and the reason I said it was puzzling, and I got a little bit of questions from people saying why are you thinking it's puzzling, is
Oh,
because
yes.
I didn't see, at least until he didn't post this until later, kind of an explanation as to why, especially a policy argument. And I was surprised by that, in part because, all of these endorsements, frankly, have really come out before we've seen a ton of policy from the candidates. And I just think it's interesting, at least, maybe because I've got my policy hat on a little bit too tightly. It's just interesting that we haven't seen a huge debate over the future direction of the party as a basis for what people are trying to do.
Yeah, I hear that, but I think obviously this we were different. Like I, as the organizer person, as someone, and I always appreciate your policy, but I want someone who's like, I want to see how you're connecting with people. So I don't think like I'm trying to think of. I would love the big time policies to be taking place like during the election. Like I feel like now anything that's groundbreaking, I don't want the conservatives to take their time to like now, hack it apart. Right. So I do think you're seeing some things from people. But I think what grassroots want, they're focused on Pierre Poilievre, they're focused on winning. So I think that's what they're really looking for. But I also don't think they're really worried about any key direction that anyone would go into.
So one angle endorsements I want to get your guys' take on here. Former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, is pointing to these endorsements as evidence that she is an outsider in this race. She's also promising to, like Thanos, snap her fingers and cut the size of cabinet and cut the size of PMO in half. What do you think of this outsider insider thing? I honestly, at this point, have no idea what outsider even means anymore. It feels like it's lost all sense of meaning to me. So I have no idea what this debate is even about. But like, what's she trying to do here, Tyler? What's your or Vandana? What do you think?
I think she's just trying to separate herself. Like it's been hard for her. She, as the finance minister, I think Tyler, you and I discussed this. Like you have to say no to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think on top of that, she's been with the prime minister. She's been at his side. She's defended a number of these policies, trying to find, and especially because if people are saying they want to change election, people think outside. But I actually don't think amongst grassroots liberals that they care about inside or outside. They just want to win. And I don't think I think it's wasted time to focus on that type of thing.
Yeah, look, that's what distinguishes us from the NDP, right? We care about winning because we believe that there's a role in government to do things. I think it's interesting, though, the specific proposal to cut cabinet in half. Now, it's not without precedent, just so we're aware. Like, Chrétien actually had a similar size cabinet, and a similar commitment, by the way, when he came into power in 1993. But, of course, if the goal here is to try to win favors with your caucus, you're taking off the field your ability to woo people, right? Like tactically, I don't exactly understand it. It really does feel like a general election message where you're trying to say that you want to show that you're going to
cut the gravy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Responsible people's
and
money.
I think all three of us have been involved in cabinet in some way, shuffles or whatnot. That's actually really hard to do. Like, I find like the actual machinery of government does require a certain amount of ministers to get stuff done and deputy ministers and all that. So I think cutting is like a nice tagline. Again, I think for the public, as you said, Tyler, like, cut the gravy. This is a waste. PMO, I actually never felt we were so, I mean, obviously I was at PMO. I didn't think there's too many of us. Like sometimes I would like more people, but I think it's a main message to the voter rather than to a grassroots. It's like, but.
Yeah, I guess one response to not getting as many cabinet endorsements as you would like is just saying, I'm going to fire half of you after the election.
All of you are out, including the three who worked at PMO. You three on this podcast are out.
Who are endorsing Carney, like hit the road. That's kind of the vibe I get from it. So I don't love that. I don't mind shrinking cabinet. I actually think like 40 people is too much to sit around a cabinet table, for being honest about it. I think cutting PMO in half, though, like it sounds good, and maybe we're not the right people to talk about this, having worked there, but like there is so much turnover, so much burnout.
Yeah,
like, people are already overworked there.
It's a 24-hour job now.
Yeah, like I get wanting to push some of the like responsibility to ministers, but like you need people to make appointments. You need people to do issues management. You need people to write press releases. Like you can't shrink the staff in half and still run a functional government. So that feels like a nice like bumper sticker, but like, practically it's not a great feasible thing.
Well, Dan, you made a very good point, and we have a chat group, and you made a very good point today, I thought, when you said something to the effect of, this would also really affect transition, right? Because we're going to go through a transition, obviously, for the new leader, but we're also going to go through a transition when we go into an election, and potentially, if we win, right, come back into government again. And so a smaller team, I mean, it may feel like it's more nimble, but actually, again, it's a team that will have less experience with government. And I do think, as you pointed out, that will set up a challenge as it relates to government properly.
Okay. Another proposal that Freeland made this week, this was later last week, actually, I guess. She put out a challenge, said, I challenge all of the candidates running in this race to run in the next election campaign. I don't know if we want Ruby Dollar running for us in the next election campaign. I'll just put that out there. But that was a pretty quick
Where would
answer.
she run? All the seats in Brampton are like
Let's
taken.
not give her ideas. Let's not go down that road. I mean, Carney pretty quickly said yes, I'm going to run. I mean, I think it's a
Yeah.
pretty feeble challenge. Obviously, he's going to say
Hmm.
yes. She also, though, did put on the table the idea that there should be 4 leadership debates, 2 in English, 2 in French. We haven't talked about debates yet. The party hasn't said when there's going to be debates yet. What do we think? How many debates do we want? What's the buzz? What's the rumor here?
So
Me and
if you
Tyler will
have
have
4,
opposite positions here.
yeah, well, I mean, look, if you have 2, it's very simple, right? It can be English, French. If you have more than 2, you then have to decide, do you do it regionally? Do you do it thematically, right? And if you do it thematically, we're going to have a policy debate. And, I think I would love a policy debate, but I think you raise a valid point, Vandana, that there are some people, at least I feel from the discussions I've been having on online and talking to liberals, that we don't maybe want to talk about policy. This feels very weird in terms of this leadership, right? That so much is about winnability, and maybe it's about just presenting the candidates to a general election audience and kind of getting them ready with the feel of what a debate commission kind of style thing would look like. But if they do more than 2, they're going to have to pick. Is it about trying to get into regions of the country where we're less known, Western Canada, for example, or is it about trying to talk about certain issues, right, and really focus around specific issues, whether that's the environment, whether that's the economy, Canada and the world, et cetera?
Yeah. I think 2 is more than enough. I think English and French is good. I think the thing is, the reason why is because if any of them had a Pierre Poilievre like personality and you were debating
Yeah.
someone who's like him, I think that's effective. But I don't think we need to focus on who we fight liberals. I think actually all the candidates, especially the top 3, are incredibly smart in their own right. I think it's good to have it so people can hear from them a little bit, see them joust a little bit how they are in debates. I just think like I really rather take this period and almost run it right into the general election and talk to Canadians. And I rather spending the time, we've all done, and Tyler, we've done, debate preps. Like that
Yeah.
takes hours of time, that takes research. So every hour you're taking to do debate prep, you're not talking to Canadians. You're not going to a cafe or a small town. And that's not just important for liberals, but just to like build the party brand as we try to win this general election. I rather us focus on that. So I think 2 is enough. I think 4 is a bit much. And I also, to your point, like I would worry that we pick, if it was issues based, like what's the topic we're focusing on? Do we focus on the right one? What is the general voter? And also what taglines can the Conservatives use from that debate for us against all of us? So that was my
Well,
piece.
I will debate you on this. I will say there should be at least 4 debates. Like I think this is the best
I
way to
knew I'd be
see.
alone on this.
This is good. We're having a debate on this. I think this is the best way to see what these candidates can
Yeah.
actually bring in terms of game in a general election. And I think, look, people say it's a short race, but I mean, the Ontario PCs did 3 debates in the Ford leadership race, and we have to worry about language and stuff too. I think we can easily do 4 debates. I would like to see more, but I get like 4 is maybe all we can realistically do in terms of timing. But I just think I look back to the 2013 Liberal leadership race, and I was not involved in the Trudeau leadership team. I was actually not even sure I was going to vote for Justin Trudeau for half that
Hey,
leadership
hey,
race.
hey.
Well, no, I had the same question that Canadians had 2 years later, which was, is this guy ready? Like, I can he
You're
handle
the
a
median
big
voter,
stage?
Dan.
Yeah, is he ready? And what convinced me he was ready was in one of the leadership debates, Martha Hall Finley came at him and said, you don't understand what the middle class is like because you grew up in an upper class family. And he responded just so confidently, talked about his experience as an MP in Papineau, and you could see the earnestness, you could see the genuineness. And I said, boy, this guy, like, he's got game. He can take on Stephen Harper in a debate. And that was when I decided, yeah, I'm going to vote for this guy. Like, he's obviously the best
Fair.
leader for the party. And I think there's an opportunity for all the candidates to show they are the best leader and that they can actually take on Polyev. I know none of the other, they're not going to get the same kind of heat they'll get from
Mm-hmm,
Polyev, but you'll see
mm-hmm.
a side of them, I think, in the debates. And I think it's just good for them to get the practice too. Like, I know
Yeah.
there's always a perception that there's winners and losers and things like that, but I think it's not a net zero sum game here because whoever wins this leadership needs to be debating in 2 weeks
Mm-hmm,
after the fact. So I think a little
mm-hmm.
practice on the debate
And
stage would be
and let's
helpful.
be honest with ourselves. Um, Pierre Poilievre is an exceptional communicator. He has had years to practice in the
Yeah.
House of Commons, right? And question period isn't a national debate, but it gets you very in the mode of how to deliver a punch, how to take a punch, how to deal with the 30-second clock, right? And Minister Freeland has obviously done that. but let's admit maybe she has some communications challenges. I'm being very cautious here in what I say. Carney's never done any of that. Like, he has not set foot in the House of Commons once. He's never done question period. Now, that gives him an advantage in terms of how different he is potentially as a candidate. But like, it's a practice, right? We all know, as you said, Vandana, like, you get in your head because this is a big deal, and it actually takes skill to do it. I mean, Barack Obama, even having gone through and won the first time around, when he did his first debate, we'll all remember, against Mitt Romney in 2012, he was rusty. He was terrible, right? Like, and you don't get a lot of shots at this in the general election. So I do tend to agree with Dan. I err on the side of more debates.
Yeah, I would say the one thing I will say about a debate that I will say like is a good thing. But the only three racialized candidates we have, that might be the only shots they really have to get like more people listening to them. And I do think an important thing, and we'll get to this later on, like, you know, Jaime Ortiz talking about reconciliation. Frank Bayless has been doing a lot of work in community as well. Bringing some core issues that maybe are not on the table to the table might be something interesting to see in the debate too.
You'll get nothing and like it. You know, a talent of mine is that I can quote damn near 100% of the character dialogue from the movie Caddyshack. It's a dubious skill. That particular line is from Judge Smales, played by the great Ted Knight, to his nephew Spaulding, who can't decide whether to get a cheeseburger or a hot dog. But I think you can reasonably apply it to the battle for consumer choice and genuine competition in high-speed internet service. You'll recall that a federal cabinet order suggested our presenting sponsor TELUS be barred from accessing the fiber networks required to offer those services to new customers in Ontario and Quebec. The upshot? Consumers in those markets could lose out on lower prices, 19% lower in Ontario compared to a year ago, and also miss out on innovative service bundles. But what they're not doing is sitting quietly and liking it. I'll get to that part in a second. The two corporate giants in the region, the Bell and Rogers duopoly, let's call it Brogers, have been getting their say, and for the moment, their way. Their message has been amplified through the megaphone of a proxy organization, the CNOC, Competitive Network Operators of Canada, who've put forward arguments that closely mirror Brogers' own. A concerning alignment with the very entities they were meant to challenge. So whose interests are being served here? Consumers or corporations? I mentioned people are not sitting quietly and accepting all of this. There are over 200,000 signatures on a petition supporting TELUS's entry into Ontario and Quebec. These are 200,000 voices representing families and businesses who clearly don't like what they've been handed for years now: limited options and high prices. 200,000 voices demanding change in the form of true competition. You can add yours at demandmoreinternetchoice.ca. The question here isn't whether competition is good for consumers. It always is. The real question comes down to this: are we going to listen to those voices or continue to protect the status quo?
Another issue that was put on the table this week, both Karina Gould and Chrystia Freeland released party renewal plans this week. I'll do a quick summary here. There's actually a lot of similarity between both of them, and obviously you can check them out on their websites. But both are calling for the return of the Young Liberal National Director, both calling for a more decentralized party structure, both calling for more regular policy touch points with membership. Freeland made some news by advocating for a new and more robust mechanism to remove the party leader. I don't know if this is like a Michael Chong Reform Act thing, or it's more she wants to have the membership, like have a recall. It's unclear, but she put that on the table. Karina Gould calling for twice annual regional sessions, as well as more meetings between the leader and regional chairs to keep the leader more in touch with what's going on in the regions. I think this is a very undercovered part of leadership races. There's an Ottawa bubble in politics. There's also an Ottawa bubble in a leadership race too, in the sense that all three of us, like, we're talking to former staffers and MPs and media, but people who will decide this leadership race are the people who've been like on the riding association for 30 years in Moose Jaw, and like those grassroots rebels who have no chance to ever elect a Liberal in their riding. And I think from experience, like, I got involved in the party in Calgary Southeast, which was Jason Kenney's riding, and we were never going to win that riding. And I'm wearing my Gerard Kennedy leadership T-shirt here tonight. I supported Gerard Kennedy in 2006, largely because he was talking about party renewal and building up the grassroots and strong ridings, and I think like this type of message has a lot of appeal to liberals in often neglected parts of the party.
Yeah, I mean, I think renewal is always a good message. I think, I think Karina's, even though they're very similar, Karina's a bit more easy to understand the way she put it out. I will say I like the young liberal touch because I think young liberals are very important. Youth are really important in general to the democratic system and just to learn from. Like there are things that like my younger staff would teach me. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense in terms of like understanding what people are feeling on the ground and just stay on top of some issues. I think it's also like grassroots liberals are so important in opposition. Like when we were in third party, the riding association president was like a driver for the PM at the time, or like they helped set up an event for me, or I'm like, can you take pictures for me? Because like there was no advance team. It was just like me and Tommy or Alex Lompy at the time, like driving him around. So I think like that's really important. I find when we come back, when we get into power and in government, things become more centralized and those voices are not as heard. So yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think it also shows to liberals that these candidates are thinking about them.
I was just looking back over the announcements that they both made, just because I think there was one key point that certainly spoke to me. They both also talked about policy renewal, and Freeland in particular also mentioned the creation of a policy commission. And not to get too nerdy on this, I know my role here is policy, but I think that that's interesting because, again, we talked before about how this is the first time we're kind of charting a new course for the party since Trudeau. And look, we do need to kind of have an internal policy renewal because we could go a bunch of different paths on a bunch of different issues. And unlike other parties, we don't have an outside ecosystem, or at least not as easily available to us, an outside ecosystem of think tanks and other institutions. And so I think that is going to be an interesting thing if the party wishes to pursue it, because in other countries, they actually fund parties, like the state funds parties to actually have their own policy commissions, their own policy institutions that go out and talk to experts and develop independent policy ideas, independent of the party, to help that particular party. And let's be honest, if we're going to face opposition, if that happens after the next election, we would need something like that.
I think from a message perspective too, I mean, we had the like insider outsider debate earlier in terms of like PMO insider, but there's also like insiders, and I've been a member of this party for a long time. I've put in the time on the ground. And I think for someone like, Karina Gould gets up there and says, I've been a liberal since I was 14 and went to my first convention when I was 17. And we saw Freeland in her launch talking about like, I was running when we were in third place. And I think those two candidates have a good story to tell about, I put in the time on the ground. I've been fighting the fight for all these years. And I think that's to their advantage to highlight that. And this is as we always say, policy is a tool to tell a story. And this is a tool to tell a story about, their involvement in the party as well too. So I think it was a good move on both of them to get that out early in the campaign, even before like the big flashy tax cut announcements. I feel like something like this actually has more resonance with a lot of liberals than a lot of the more substantive policy things that will get put out probably later on in the race. Anything else from last week? I've got a few other things I actually want to throw on the table, but just kind of we'll toss it open. The stuff that's happened in the past week. Anything else either of you wanted to flag that caught your attention?
I want to give a shout out to Minister Jean-Yves Duclos. He's probably not a name that's household to folks outside of Quebec. He is the Quebec lieutenant. He's been the minister of a bunch of different portfolios, from employment and ESTC to now public services and procurement. But he put out a letter this week because I know he had been considering who he wants to endorse, because as Vandana said, there's been a rush of endorsements, particularly amongst cabinet. And rather than put his name down for one candidate, he basically outlined in 3 or 4 pages both his own personal priorities. And remember, he's a PhD economist from LSE, also went to the University of Alberta, and has roots out there as a Quebecer, which is interesting. But put out his own personal priorities on social policy and also Quebec's priorities. So you'll see everything in there, from the national shipbuilding strategy to what the future of our investments and things like the Canada Child Benefit should be, in the National School Food Program, and other things, including an investment in the Guaranteed Income Supplement. But the point of it all is, it's an interesting tactic, because he's saying, rather than give my name over without having a policy debate, he's like inviting people to respond to it, inviting the candidates to respond to it, and potentially we can see over the course of the campaign, if some of the candidates impress him, he could use that to actually give an endorsement at a later point in time. And I just think that's an interesting strategy, given that he's saying, I'm not going to give my name away for free.
I love how he's playing hard to get.
Yeah.
Like he's being hard to get. He's like, no, you got to woo me, date me. Like I'm not just giving it out for free. Like I like the approach. It's interesting. I love it.
Give me a little economic policy. Give me a little distinct society. You know, it's I like that. Yeah, that's good.
He's somebody. I'll just say he is somebody who, in a future Liberal government, could easily be a finance minister. Like he is.
Oh yes.
Very, as we would say in French, ministrable.
Yeah, he's a wonderful person to work with.
Excellent. While we're talking about Quebec, actually, I noticed at least the three major candidates all did a foray into Quebec last weekend. And I think they all actually did really well. And I know we talked earlier before about Quebec kind of being up for grabs because other than Frank Baylis, there's no Quebecer in the race. And we talked about kind of, endorsements and what that could matter there. But I think all three candidates themselves a lot of good. Mark Carney had a really fun ride along with François-Philippe Champagne. Like François-Philippe is driving in his car through Shawinigan and Mark Carney's talking about Quebecois music. And they actually had a media camera with them filming the whole thing. I think whoever on the Carney campaign arranged to get the media to cover this thing, like make them the tour director for the next election. Like that was brilliant. It came across so good. Carney looked natural. It was great. Like really signaling that Quebecois connection there. And then Karina Gould did a lot of media as well too. And I think by this point, it's probably fairly safe to say she's got the best French of the top three candidates. So anytime she's in front of Quebec media, I think that works to her advantage. But I'll actually give the biggest props to Chrystia Freeland, who went on Tout le monde en parle last week, which for those who don't know is a very well-watched show in Quebec. Also a very difficult interview. I remember whenever the prime minister was going on Tout le monde en parle, there would be hours of debate, of prep.
And it made Jack Layton. Remember that made Jack Layton in the 2011.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And even to some extent, I think even Blanchet, kind of when he took off in 2019, I remember like after that we did the polling, like after his Tout le monde appearance, like that went off as well there too. But I thought I watched the interview and I thought Freeland did really well. Like I think it was better than any of her English interviews over the past year. Like she was comfortable. She was kind of rolling with the punches. They were joking about is Mark Carney giving your kids presents at Christmas and things like that. And it's hard to kind of roll with those punches in your second language, but I think she did a good job. She also landed a few of her key talking points. She called herself a male féroce, like the strong mother against Donald Trump. She talked about Poilievre being the petit ami de Monsieur Trump. So I think she actually did a really good job there, and probably given the audience, I don't know if it's her Daily Show moment in Quebec, but it was I think her best moment of the leadership campaign.
I agree.
So far.
Agree. She looked very relaxed, very conversational, very presentable. Like she looked like she was enjoying herself, which sometimes I don't feel like I see her do that on media, but she looked like she genuinely was having a good time and looked relaxed.
She also said a few things about Mark Carney, which I think if folks can access the French and get a closed caption version, I would encourage you to listen to it because she was quite spicy in some places, spicier, frankly, than I would have thought she'd be, and I think is sometimes her normal speed. She said things like, I'm a politician. He's a civil servant. He's a fonctionnaire. He would be a great finance minister. I'm running to be prime minister, which again, it's the first time I think we're starting to see in this campaign where they're getting a bit edgy with each other. They're getting a bit chippy. I don't know that we'll get too far down that road of chippiness over the course of the campaign. But it was a little surprising on that front. And I'd be interested to see if she repeats any of that in English. I haven't heard her say that yet.
I actually think she's been spicy for the campaign. Even her launch was spicy and more directed. I think, I was surprised because I haven't seen her with Fighting Worlds like in the years I've seen her, but I've definitely seen her doing that. I haven't seen all of them being spicy, but she definitely knows who her opponent is, and she's trying to definitely differentiate herself and be a little equipped about it.
I'm Hamas, and this is Simon, and we live in Surrey. We started hosting on Airbnb because we thought we had the spare room and why not share it with people? When our guests come in, first thing usually they ask is, I'm really hungry, it's been a really long flight, can you recommend a place? Usually Simon is really good with that. He knows all the good spaces. Because we got a lot of good reviews and people commented on the overall look of the space, I was like, okay, maybe I can do this for a living. it actually gave me the courage to start school in interior design. It made such an impact on us financially, and I don't know, I think we're happier because we started Airbnb for sure.
I got one other thing from this week I want to bring up. Anything else you guys want to throw on the table first, though, before we go there?
No, go for Dan.
You're good? Okay. This, I think, is the most important thing that happened last week that nobody in the mainstream media has covered at all. You probably haven't heard about this unless you follow Cole Hogan on Twitter, but he went into the Meta ad library, and because basically when you run Facebook ads, it's all public information. You can go and search for the amount of money the different campaigns have spent on advertising for digital advertising. So he looked since the start of the leadership campaign, how much the campaigns have spent on basically Facebook, Instagram ads. And he found that the Mark Carney campaign has spent $95,000 on digital ads, and Freeland has spent zero. Gould has spent zero. I went back and I just double checked. I did see Gould put a couple ads in, like $1,000 worth, like right before the membership cut off. But basically, Mark Carney, almost $100,000, $0 for the other candidates. And to me, this is phenomenally important because even at a modest conversion rate, and I mean that is you see the ad, you click on the ad, it takes you to this website, you sign up and get a Liberal membership. I don't know what the conversion rate is, but even at a low estimate, he probably brought in 20,000, 30,000 new supporters via these digital ads. If we're talking about 200,000 to 300,000 total Liberal voters in this race, that's 10% of the entire membership that came in through this one tactic, which is just phenomenally huge. And you can't really do any advertising after the membership cutoff because at that point you're just targeting the existing membership, and it's hard to advertise to that existing membership. But at the first part of the race, you're trying to bring people into that. So actually like running general population ads, and anybody who knows Mark Carney's name and clicks through, like you're bringing people in who are low hanging fruit. And, it speaks to their fundraising ability that they had 100K to just sort of like shoot out that way. But I also think it's just a really good tactic. And I mean, it may be something that is decisive at the end of the day in terms of the difference between winning and losing. I would take $95,000 of digital advertising money over 56 caucus endorsements any day of the week if you gave me the choice.
I use them a lot to do multicultural outreach to different. So we did them in language on Facebook, on Instagram, and they were successful. I'm not sure what the conversion rate, but like we won, so I think it's okay. But I do find Christian Freeland's doing a traditional air war,
that's right.
And I think that we do have to think digitally. And I found with every campaign I worked on, 2015, 2019, 2021, I had to go more and more digitally, especially how I advertised, right? So I think that's a very effective strategy. Will all those people get out to come to vote? That's a different story because maybe they're interested in him, but like I'm not sure if they're going to actually go vote that day. But I do think it's actually still interesting for even after membership cutoff because you still have to persuade people. And I think like, as you said, you'll have debates, you'll have other policy things come out. There's still quite a few weeks left for people to kind of show their colors a bit more. That I think still showing up in digital feeds and just having people see you is still going to be well worth it in terms of this next phase of voter persuasion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually reached out to a couple of the campaigns because when I saw that, I was actually very surprised that he was the only one. Obviously he spent a decent amount of money, but also he was the only one. And what I heard from a couple of the campaigns, interestingly, was, and these may sound like excuses, I'm not sure, but one is, they were noting that it takes a long time to get approval on Meta for an ad. And yeah, I see your eye roll there, Vandana.
I didn't feel like it was that long, but okay.
Yeah. No. I know. I'm just reporting what I heard.
I haven't done it in a while, to be fair, but okay.
Yeah. But also, that not sure that this was a tactic that they were expecting that they had to do necessarily early on in this race of the campaign, which again, I think speaks to an interesting diversion because I think you're right that we're starting to see Carney is a very digitally native campaign that they've been running. They've been getting very good momentum on socials, right, of both just stuff that they're doing and how they're promoting it. And then I will say, in the course of last week, I saw a bunch of his stuff in ads that appeared in my different feeds. So obviously the algorithm was working in terms of targeting Liberals very well. So I think props to them. They did the best. I think some people may be wondering whether, some of the folks who are involved in the campaign, obviously, because we know they have expertise in that area, whether that has given them a leg up or not. But clearly they've been running the tables on this front. And
I'd say the other benefit of digital, I don't know if they did this, but if they were targeting those digital ads to the 100 weakest Liberal ridings in the country, then you've tripled your return on investment right
Yeah,
there. Because if you're
totally.
signing up, you're signing up Liberals in Saskatchewan and Northern Ontario and places like
Lethbridge.
that, like
Yeah.
you can target digital ads to those ridings that are weaker. And then it's not just 10% of the list that you've signed up then, it may be like 20% on the point system. So I don't know if they were targeting them, but that's another benefit of digital ads that, I think gives them a leg up if they were doing that.
And they can go back to them too. I think once they have like things that once they get the voter list and they want to persuade people and they have a new policy or an action item that people want, they can put that back out there too.
Okay. Well, it is time for everybody's favorite segment, the Mulcair Minute.
I know more than most, believe me. My analysis as someone in politics for a long time, I think that Mr. Charest is going to make very quick work of Pierre Poilievre.
So the Mulcair Minute, for those who weren't listening last week, this is a time when we like to shame a pundit or a columnist who has a really bad take on the Liberal leadership race. My greatest hope for this podcast is that one week we will be able to call out Tom Mulcair in the Mulcair Minute. And I'm pretty sure Tom will give us that moment knowing him. So I think that week is coming. It's not this week, though. Vandana, who is it this week that we want to...
It is Eileen Dooley, who is a talent and leadership development specialist based in Calgary. She contributed to the Globe and Mail. And her title is Women, Resist the Urge to Clean Up a Mess and Sit Out This Liberal Leadership Race. Are we ready to hear V? This article infuriated me for two reasons. One, it's 2025. Why are we telling women to sit out? Her summary is that, we're like, they're going to lose, stop trying to clean up other messes. It's probably going to be a man. Like, why are we telling women that? Whether, like, first of all, there are still lots of steps to go before you can determine who's winning. And every step for Miss Freeland, for Karina Gould, for Ruby Dalla, like, is a step for women. Whether they make it to the top or not, they are making marks. They are bringing up issues. They are making a name for themselves. And it's not because they want to clean up a mess. They want the job. They want to be the prime minister. So why shouldn't they try? My second issue with this is that why are we counting the party out? She says, the Liberal Party won't even be official opposition. Now, Liberals, I know we're all excited. I know some of us are seeing the polls and we're feeling movements. But listen, just because we swiped right and got a match doesn't mean they're ready for us to exchange numbers or meet IRL. So let's just play it cool. Let's keep working the grassroots. We still got a lot of steps to go. But I don't think we should be counting the party out. And I don't think we should ever tell women or racialized people like, ooh, it's probably not going to work. You shouldn't try, because it's like one thing she says is that, is it the right time? It's just not the time now. It's never going to be the right time for a woman to be the prime minister until it happens. And it's going to happen at some point. Maybe it's this time. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I think this is the wrong. 100%. And there's different reasons. Like she talked about Kamala Harris, and I don't think they're comparables here because, like, I think the DNC could have run a leadership race, but they chose not to, and it was a short time for them too. But yeah, I don't think, and her last line is that women should just sit back and let it happen. No. And if some women choose that, you don't have the mental capacity to jump in and do that race. And some women, like Melanie Jolie, want to focus on her cabinet responsibilities. She has a right to do that. But I don't think we should be telling all women to sit back and just watch this burning happen because, I'm feeling good about the ground. I'm not saying it's a shoo-in. I'm saying things feel good. So let's keep the momentum up. That is it.
Here. And I would add, this column could have easily been written towards Christy Clark in 2011 or Kathleen Wynne in 2012.
Yes.
Taking over from long-running governments that people assumed was going to lose. And they won those leadership races. In Christy Clark's case, like we talked about last week with no caucus support, and then won the general election after that. Yep. I also think the assumption that she's making is she's saying, well, okay, the Liberals will lose and they'll get rid of the leader. And then that's when you should run, is like after the election. I think we haven't talked about this on this podcast yet, but I think that Liberals have set expectations so low that if listen, hear me out here.
Go up with your pants on.
If the leader gets second place and gets 80 to 100 seats, I don't think there's going to be like a leadership review to get rid of them.
No, I don't
think
think
people will be happy with the outcome. So I think, and I think both the women running here would easily stay around if the party wanted them to stay around afterwards as well too. So I think it's not just a case of like being the Kim Campbell and then getting tossed aside. I think there's actually an opportunity to build in opposition,
Mhm.
possibly for the person who wins this leadership here. So yeah, I totally agree with you, B.
And can I just say two things on that? One, just to circle back to the Tout le monde en parle interview, Freeland actually in the interview refers to the fact that she has reached out to Kim Campbell for advice. How much, I don't know, but she did say that one of the things she asked Campbell about was, what is it like to be a woman that's trying to lead the party? How do you do it successfully? How do you avoid that glass cliff? And I think the other thing that's interesting, and you kind of picked up on it there, Dan, is it feels like we're starting to get momentum, right? It feels like we're in a position potentially to be the official opposition and maybe be quite competitive in the next election. And if that's the case, I do think that whoever is the leader now will be probably the leader for a while.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because a lot of people took themselves out of contention in this race because they thought that person's not going to be around for a while, and they may have made a big strategic mistake.
I agree. And one other thing maybe I would just add while we're talking about like the gender issue here. I know when Freeland left cabinet in the fall, there was the cackling from the usuals, like, oh,
Mhm.
Trudeau's a fake feminist and blah blah blah. But I will say, like, even if a man wins this race, the only two cabinet ministers running in this race are women. Melanie
Yep.
Joly would have been maybe the front runner or a front runner. Anita Anand would have been a very credible
Mhm. Mhm.
candidate. So I think we are seeing the downstream effects of all the efforts Trudeau did in terms
Yeah.
of like ask her to run in 2015, the gender equal cabinet, then promoting women like Melanie Joly up to important roles in cabinet. Like I think
Mhm.
all those efforts that were done at the time are actually paying off in terms of having a lot of prominent liberal women who could run viable leadership campaigns right now.
And it's changed the culture. I've seen even in other organizations, people don't want males anymore. Like they want, equal representation of men and women. I'm seeing in corporate Canada, people looking for that. So I think like it's. I'm not saying it's a trend, but I'm saying that started something that now normalize a bit more.
Okay. Next segment, we're going to go a little inside baseball here. Vandana, you reached out to the campaign teams and you're
Did.
going to give a little rundown of like who some of the different players are on the different campaign teams, who's running the campaigns, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say a lot of these teams have other people as well, but these are the ones that wanted to be named. Some people, leadership, sometimes you're working the side of your desk and maybe your company does not know that. So these are the people who are on and what the names were able to share. So I'll start with Karina Gould. I have Elliot Rockington running the campaign there. We have Daryl Dean on digital, Samantha Schmidchuk, Frederic Say, Eloge Butera on policy, and Maya Tamasi on youth. And I thought it was very interesting they have one person specifically on youth. I think that's really smart of Karina. In the 2021 election, I had Kazim Habib doing youth policy and youth campaign. Oh, and then sorry, that was in 20, I think maybe 19. 2021, I think was Aisha.
Well,
And Aisha Chungtai. And it was very effective. Sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
I was gonna say, so I've worked with Maya before. She is exceptional. She's a great
Oh,
organizer. She knows youth exceedingly well. And I also think there's an interesting subplot to this whole leadership where I think Karina actually could clean up among some of the young liberals.
I agree. I agree. For Miss Freeland, we have Tom Allison running the show there with Milton Chen. Milton Chen, to this day, if I run an E-Day, I will run it how Milton has taught me because it's still the most effective way I've done an E-Day ever. Like you're never there till midnight, still printing things. Like you're done. You have a good night's sleep and you're ready. We have Kat Chaplinskis, and girl, if I mess up your name, I'm so sorry. Everyone messes up my name. I totally understand, but I tried. And Jessica Hall as deputy campaign manager, which I shocked Tyler with, I think, last week. But and funny story about Jessie. Jessie was the Western desk for the PM when we were in third party, and I was the Ontario desk. And at the time, we hated each other. Like we were so catty. And we are very good friends now. But like I wanted him out of my space in Brampton, and he wanted in. We were competing for Cyrus Reporter's love. He was our chief of staff, and I remember years later, I was telling Cyrus the story. He's like, I don't understand why you thought like that was limited or something. Like he was like this frustrated dad at us. But Jesse and I are really good. But he's a disruptor. He thinks outside the box. So I think that's really interesting. And for Mark Carney, like people know Jerry Butts is there. Like having around giving these Jerry ideas. Braden Cayley is the official, I think, campaign director. And for the person who you're praising for that tour, Marie-Pascale Desrossiers, that is all her excellent job. Also on tour, Caitlin Moulin-Boudreau. And we have Mike Burton, Ange Dillon, Dove Palmer, all in different variations of field, Ontario field, GOTV, Mike Macca in operation. Funny, Ahmed Hassan with Mr. Freeland, and Mike Macca is his chief of staff with Mark Carney and Tim Cooper driving policy. So interesting teams, but I think the interesting thing, I'm seeing a lot of a lot of like old names and people who've done this before. Burton was also with me in leadership with the PM years ago, but a lot of up and comers, new people who are taking on who have been on campaigns but taking on leadership now. So I think it's very interesting. But it's interesting to me see the different. I see the names and I'm thinking through. I've worked with so many of these people, like the different dynamics and who's picking what and how the campaigns are shaping to be. So a lot of these things when I see the names, I'm like that's why you went this way. So yeah.
Can I just do a comment? I'll just say, so Tim worked with me and obviously with all of us, but in the PMO policy unit.
Tim Krupa,
went
right?
off. Tim Krupa,
Yeah.
sorry, I should say. Yes, the Groupster. I'll just say, I think what's interesting in his case is he took a leave from his job in the private sector.
Yeah,
in
Goldman
DC.
Sachs. Yeah,
exactly, to come do this because he's suiting up for, potentially trying to help what could be a future prime minister. And I just think that's interesting because he's not a staffer on the Hill like a lot of the other folks on the different teams. He's taken a big leap, and I'll just say to my friend, thanks for doing it, because whoever wins, it's a fight.
and I remember Krupa as an intern in third party, like still happy-go-lucky guy. So
we joked when we were talking about this segment that this whole segment was just going to be us saying like, oh, this person's so good and this person's so good. But I will say, if you allow me to say something negative about one of the names you said there, Tim Krupa, maybe he is the nicest guy in politics, but probably the absolute worst fantasy hockey player I've ever been in a pool with. This guy is like a big Oilers fan. Last year, half of his playoff pool players.
I'm an Oilers fan too.
No, but half of his players
first.
were Oilers. The Oilers went to the Cup final, and he still finished last in our pool. So obviously, very poor.
Right.
I hope his policy chops are better than his prognostication
Not bad.
chops.
Fair. I did reach out to the other campaigns as well. So Frank Bayless, we have Patrick Quinn and Mark Levine. Mark Levine apparently was working at LPCQ at some point, or he was like the leader there. We have Patrick Quinn, who worked for Francis Scarpaleggia. He was like the riding president there. He's kind of splitting them up like on English and French. So I thought it was very interesting that he said to me that we have one focusing completely on Quebec stuff and one person on the rest of Canada. So I thought it was interesting. And for Ruby Dalla, I know Mandy McGarrett helped kick off her stuff in terms of just getting her settled and ready to go. She had to take a step back because she does have a full-time job and wasn't able to do it. But I think there's a number of grassroots people behind Ruby Dalla. And Jaime, I've tried to get in touch with the campaign, so I haven't been able to. But if you want to reach out to me and tell me who your team is, I'll announce it next week.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I think we've got time for one more topic here. We put out on social media last week asking for feedback from listeners. What do you want us to talk about? What are things you think we should be covering that no one else is talking about here? We've got a list of things we could get through here. I think we got time for one this week, but there's a couple other good questions that we'll bump to next week in terms of we can talk about here. Tyler, do you want to take the question about policy here? You may read off the question and kind of take the first shot at it.
Yeah, so Alex Kohut, who I think may be a name that's familiar to all of us, but particularly to you, Dan, who may have worked with you.
Sorry, Alec?
Yes. So he commented, and it's interesting. It goes back to a bit of a segue of what we were talking about earlier with Jean Duclos. I really like this particular comment because he said, it feels like, no one has actually used the opportunity in this campaign to try to drive a news cycle. I'd be curious if you think that will continue and what might be available to a candidate like, for example, Karina Gould, if she wanted to become a bigger part of the conversation via an ambitious or disruptive policy proposal. And I think he also went on kind of to note that, like, as millennials, as which we've talked about in the past pod, we are thinking about how does the party re-engage with young people, right? That's going to require you to have a really ambitious policy agenda, whether it's on housing, whether it's on affordability, whether it's how you think about kind of the openness of institutions to change. I think there's real space here. I think he's right for Karina. I've heard through the grapevine that there's probably going to be some very interesting big announcements starting to come from some of the candidates. And I do think it's interesting, as Alec points out, whether or not someone's going to try to use this, whether it's a person in caucus, to try to encourage a candidate to really push them to go in a particular direction. So far, as we said, Jean-Yves Duclos appears to be the only person who's done that. And I think, our caucus, and now that we're moving into the persuasion phase, ought to try to think about what power they have to push the party in a particular direction.
Yeah, I think that's it's interesting. I mean, the most prominent disruptive policy is Rubidala promising to deport 500,000 Canadians, but that's maybe not what he was angling for in terms of an answer. Um, so yeah, look, I think from a policy perspective, obviously, Carney and to some extent Freeland are having to put policies on the table that they are comfortable running on in a
Yeah.
general election. So it's not so much about getting attention; it's about actually like laying out a policy agenda that will be electable because like we said, there's not really any time to pivot away from the things you promised in the leadership race. Like anything that is rolled out today by somebody who wins the leadership race is going to be a platform in the Liberal Party campaign, and it's something that basically will be treated as policy. So I think there's not really room for them just to do something like, oh, this is crazy, let's get people to sign up. So but I think like the Karina Gould example is a good kind of case study on this, because I think she's somebody who kind of needs to get more attention and is just trying to like get a bit more of eyeballs on her campaign. So, I think from her perspective, there's a progressive lane open in this race, given that Carney and Freeland are both kind of a bit more centrist. So, I think if she puts something on the table like a, tax the wealthy, wealth tax, big business tax, like something like that to flash some progressive credentials, that could be interesting. There's probably other ideas as well too. Tyler, you're the one that comes up with bright ideas. It's not me, but I will say that
You just poll them and see, like, is it actually a great idea, Tyler? I'm going to poll it first.
yeah, but I do think there's an opportunity for sure to like put some big policy lobs out there and throw some ideas, especially like we talked about youth, like some youth friendly stuff.
Yeah.
That could be a good policy lob for someone like her who's trying to get attention right now.
I see, like, who snuck in the rebrand of like the capital gains to a wealth tax. Like, you're just trying to bring it back. Like, I do think all the candidates are being a little like the candidates who are like kind of out there more, like Carney, Freeland, and Karina, being fairly safe. Though I do think there is, like, if you're seeing yourself neck and neck, there is space for a disruptive piece. So like, how am I going to differentiate myself from somebody else? But I think for the Frank Bayless of the world, or Jaime, even putting something really disruptive there to also bring your idea forward, but just get a voting block for you. Like, Dan, I worked on the Matrix with you, and that was like in the campaign, like how different voting blocks, like how we connected them and got them to vote for us. But if you can bring forward a strong segment because your policy idea is important, that can help you get a long way.
Yep.
And obviously Jaime is trying to raise issues around reconciliation.
Yeah.
So it will make sense. I'm sure he'll be talking about that, and that will be getting those issues out there in the forefront. Okay, let's stop the clock. How about we do a round? Who nailed it this week? Who do we want to shout out for having done a particularly good job this week? Anyone can jump in.
I do it down. So I have to do it. It's not an up, it's a down. Vandana mentioned capital gains. Obviously, Chrystia Freeland made a pretty big policy announcement this past week, basically saying that she would undo the thing that she brought forward in the last budget of a capital gains tax. We talked about it actually on the last pod because I think we were assuming that actually it would be another candidate, possibly Mark Carney, to get out in front of that issue first. It actually was her the next day. I just think, as I said before, I think this is a bad idea. I think it picks us at a scab that we don't need to pick at. It gives ammunition to the opposition. I understand intellectually why, in the context of Trump, we're concerned about a flight of capital. There are different ways to do it without looking like you're walking back something that's significant you were involved in.
I was just going to say that I think she, in terms of nailing it, I think her To the Monde Paula interview was really well done, and the best thing I saw this week from a candidate. So yeah, I think she nailed it on that.
Yeah, I was going to give the Carney camp my nailed it for the digital ads, but I will already mention that. So I do want to kind of give a shout out to the young liberals of Canada here. I saw YLC President Liam Olson doing some media last week. I also caught a CBC interview with Jadine Napeel, who is my many times removed successor as Alberta Young Liberals president. But Jadine was talking about how the young liberals are out there. They're just like doing phone banking to sign up young people and get as many young people signed up as possible in the race. Liam's article in the Post was talking about basically actually the Jean-Yves Duclos strategy, right? They basically put out a list of demands that they wanted in terms of policies to impact young people. And they said, look, Liberal leadership candidates, you should endorse these policies. You should talk about them. And I think that's just great because I think, this is a time when the young Liberals can actually have a lot of influence in a leadership race and actually be quite influential. And they're not just scattering off to all the different campaigns. They're actually like doing a concerted effort to take advantage of that influence and, bring about some change from that. So good job, YLC. You nailed it this week.
I think
Well, and
also,
go ahead, Vanna.
I was going to say, I think with everything happening with Trump, with affordability, I do worry about youth issues being left off the table, especially when people are like worried about us being, too far left. And like, young people tend to be, they often are progressive. So I want them to voice themselves as much as possible. And I do worry that their voices are being left out. So I hope some candidates pick some of that stuff up.
And I was just going to say that I think it's really encouraging that the YLC is doing this because unlike in the provincial party, we don't give separate points to the young Liberal clubs, right? And so they are going to have to compete harder for their issues to get noticed at a time in which the party needs to be front and center in terms of reintroducing itself to young people. Even if you believe Frank Graves' wild polling numbers, and I'm not going to get into that debate, we can leave that for another pod. Even if you look at those numbers, those very encouraging numbers, we're still far behind amongst young people, right? We're starting to make up ground amongst middle-aged and older voters, but we're still very far behind amongst young people. And kudos to the YLC for doing this because I think they're going to have to really put in the effort to get noticed in this campaign.
Great. We'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, Airbnb, and we'll see you next week on another leg of the race to replace.